Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn. I'm a principal psychologist at the Police Psychological Services Department, Singapore Police Force. Today I'll be sharing on the behavioral analysis of victims of loan scams. And this will be the scope of my presentation today. So just some background to loan scams. Now, scams are an international problem. People all over the world are being cheated out of millions of dollars. In Singapore, loan scams are one of the top 10 scams, and from a period of January to June 2021, loan scam was the top scam. There are two variants of loan scams. The first is a trial loan, and the second is a direct loan. In a trial loan, what happens is the scammer offers a loan, deposits a small amount of money into the victim's account, and then asks for a larger sum of money to be transferred back as part of processing fee. In a direct loan, the scammer offers a loan that is very much lower than the current market interest rate, and very little documentation, such as only your ID, is needed. This is an example of a WhatsApp message of a loan scam. And I'll share a bit about the research question for this study. So we were interested why people fall for loan scams, and to that end, we looked at the quantitative and qualitative analysis of victim statement of facts as well as in-depth interviews. And the purpose of this study was really to look at how we can prevent people from falling prey to loan scams and propose, how to refine crime prevention messages. So for the literature review, we looked at three major areas. The first was cognitive biases, in particular optimism bias, sunk cost fallacy, and near miss bias, especially their application in loan scams. Compliance techniques or persuasion techniques. Of Cialdini's 7 techniques, these 4 techniques, authority, social proof, scarcity, behavioral commitment, weigh heavily in loan scams. We also looked at advance fee payment fraud scams internationally, and we looked at how the Singapore model compared to that. In the Singapore model, it is actually a combination model. It is the advance fee payment fraud at first, and that is combined with threat or coercion. So it's a 2-part model. So in terms of methodology of the study, we had 2 parts to the methodology. The first part was to look at the literature review and code the significant factors. So we coded and analyzed 293 statement of facts. The second part was to interview victims, and so using the factors that we found, we developed a semi-structured interview, and we did the interviewing for these victims. So to share on some of the findings of the study. So in terms of demographic findings, we found that victims tend to be male rather than female. Gender interaction with nationality was not significant. Victims tended to be more Singaporean than other nationalities, and Singaporean victims tended to be either Chinese or Malay, about equal proportion than other ethnic groups. Victims who were foreigners tended more to be Malaysians than other nationalities. In terms of age, we find that it's a bimodal curve with 25 and 45 being the peaks. We found that age and nationality was significant, so that if you were more than 38 years old, you tended to be Singaporean. Age by race was also significant, and we found that there were more Chinese victims in the age group of 28 to 37. In terms of occupation, age was also significant, and we found that large majority of victims who were under the age of 27 tended to be NS men or students. In terms of occupation, we find that 59% of the victims in our sample were white-collar executives and 40% were blue-collar workers. Victims tended to take about 6.5 days to report after the first transfer of money, and this is very significant because the longer you wait to report, the harder it is to freeze money or do any kind of investigation to track where the money went. Victims made at least 2 transactions, 1 to 4 on average, and victims tended to transfer minimally 1.5 to 300% of the original loan they asked for. If you're wondering, why 300% was transferred, well, it's mostly the victims who were coerced or threatened that transferred so much money. Singaporean victims, okay, tended to be scammed by uh, more money, sorry, than foreign victims, and they were scammed about 2,000 more than foreign victims. No gender difference. Victims tended to stop transferring money when they did not receive the loan, or they were suspicious why they had to keep transferring to different accounts, or they did not have any more funds. So 19% of our victims were threatened in the sample, and they were threatened in terms of their safety or being embarrassed, telling people that they had taken a loan. 10% were harassed, okay, either calls to the victim, calls to the workplace, calls to their spouses, and so on. Scammers tended to target victims through text messages or WhatsApp platforms, and then they would always ask the victims to switch platforms to evade detection. The most common platform they would switch to is WhatsApp. Follow-up for the victim will occur within the day, and usually within 24 hours. The scammers will always say, perform the loan transfers and everything before 6 p.m., before the office close. Okay. The first transfer from the victim was usually about 20% or slightly less than the original amount asked for. And in terms of the persuasion techniques, these three persuasion techniques are the heaviest used. Okay, authority followed by commitment followed by scarcity in our sample. So this is a brief summary of the flow of scam. In the first stage, okay, the advertising stage, the scammer will always have a very legitimate looking website, online form, a very legitimate looking business logo, a lot of business jargon, or they will send messages via SMS or Facebook or WhatsApp. And this makes use of the principle of authority because they are trying to create a sense of legitimacy through the websites and the form. Usually on the form or in the SMS, it will be very attractive interest rates for limited time only. Please get your loan within these few days, that kind of thing. So it creates a sense of urgency and scarcity. A lot of the victims tell us that when they come across these websites or they receive these messages, they do not immediately think that there's something wrong and there are any red flags. And this shows that a lot of them have this optimism bias where they don't believe that they will be victims of scams. So in the follow-up stage, okay, scammers would try to mimic a banking process by asking victims for various financial documents like CPF, income tax, so on and so forth. And this creates a sense of authority and legitimacy, like, they are really in the banking, money lending business. The scammer will also mention that, he needs to check with the supervisor if the loan is possible given your financial documents, and the supervisor would then, chat with the victim to talk about the loan process, and this gives the idea of social proof. It leverages very much on that. So in the offer stage, the scammer will say that the loan is too high, and they will tell the victim, okay, let me just give you a slightly lower amount, but this is just for you, or this is just for a limited time. And this leverages again on scarcity or urgency. Another variant is where the scammer will say okay to the amount, but says that, because of your not so good banking credentials, okay, this is only out of goodwill. And that leverages on reciprocity, because if somebody does something good for you, you'll try to do something good for that person. And so the victims are very willing to then quickly transfer money for processing fee and so on. The scammer will also sometimes, okay, deposit a small amount of money in the trial loan variant as goodwill or promotional offer, and then they will later ask for the victim to transfer back more money than what was initially deposited. That makes use of the principle of commitment, because the victim had already opened an account, had already received the money, had already transferred money, so the victim is more likely to follow through on various transfers later. Now, in the demand stage, the scammer will ask for various money transfers to be made, citing a variety of reasons like GST, admin fee, upfront payment, and so on. And they would issue very legitimate looking invoices, such as invoices that spoof MAS logo, fake business receipt with reference number, and so on. And they would cycle this through this whole process, issuing an invoice, asking for money, issuing for invoice, asking for money, and keep asking the victims to transfer money. This makes use of a variety of principles, okay? In the money transfer, because of the invoices and how legitimate they look, victims really believe that these are true invoices, and that leverages on the principle of authority. The scammers will always tell the victims that we must complete the transaction quickly. I send you the invoice, pay me quickly. We must complete by the end of the day. And that makes use of the principle of scarcity. The victims themselves, okay, because they had already started this whole process and they are more likely to try and see it through, and that leverages on the principle of commitment. Victims also tell us that, when they look at these invoices that are repeatedly sent to them by the scammers, they never thought that, this would be a scam. They never thought that they would be so unlucky. And this operates on the optimism bias. The scammers also, spend some time talking and convincing the victims. They always tell the victims that, you're almost there, just one more transfer, and that makes use of the near miss effect. They also tell the victims that, you have already given so much money, what's a little bit more, and that makes use of the sunk cost. At this stage, threat, the scammers would threaten the victims when they refuse to pay any more, whether it's because they don't have any more money left, or they just realize that something might be wrong. Threats are usually in the form of videos or pictures of houses that have been burned or splashed with paint. As you can see, one of the victims told us that the scammer had sent so many videos of houses that he had burned. She was really very frightened for her family, and so she kept transferring money. Okay, at this stage, the victims usually realize, they have been scammed because they have transferred a large amount of money, but never receive any loan, or they have been threatened. When victims realize that it's a scam, most of the time they will just quickly try to close their accounts or contact the bank to freeze the money, and then they will make a report to the police. Unfortunately, a lot of times, like I said, it takes about 6.5 days, and that becomes very difficult in terms of freezing the money. So in view of time, I'm just going to share very briefly on the crime prevention strategies. This is not exhaustive, but it is in line with our findings. So in terms of crime prevention, because we found that there were more males than females, we want to target sites that have a strong male following. In terms of race and nationality, we want to have crime prevention messages in Mandarin, especially on platforms that reach both Singaporeans and Malaysians. In terms of age group, we want to have crime prevention messages or efforts that are very tailored for these age groups, like students, NS boys, versus people in their 40s. In terms of occupation, because white collar is about 60% and blue collar is about 40%, we want to have very specific outreach efforts that tailor platforms that these people might be looking at. Because it's about 6.5 days on average that people take to report what has happened. We really want to have timely crime prevention messages at the platforms that scammers are using. So, for example, Facebook, for example, online sites where people key in, loans. We want to have pop-up messages, and we want to talk about the process of scam and how important it is to recognize the signs of scams. Transactions, because a lot of people don't really understand how financial transactions are supposed to occur. Like, you cannot have licensed money lenders soliciting over the SMS. Okay, so these things need to be made known and aware to the members of public. The loan process especially, okay, because victims were made to pay for GST and there's no such thing in loans. So things like that need to be made known to the wider public. Because scammers use a lot of persuasion techniques, okay, in the scam process, we also want to use the same persuasion techniques in our crime messaging. So for example, in terms of optimism bias, we want to use very relatable, tailored, personalized stories of victims. Anybody can be scammed, even victims, for example, who are in the banking industry. Just a bit about the limitations of the study. We really lack a lot of data fields to perform more in-depth analysis. I really want to find out cognitive processes, but these are not captured in the statement of facts. The small sample size for in-depth interview was also a problem because a lot of victims did not agree to the being interviewed. And so that's the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions and you can email me for more information about the study. Thank you.